I didn't say a word when the HOA president slammed the foreclosure notice down on my kitchen table. Her voice was sharp, rehearsed, like she'd been practicing this scene in the mirror for weeks. Something about failure to comply with covenant standards. Something about final remedies. I let her finish her little monologue. Then, without a word, I slid a folder across the table. Inside was a certified copy of my property deed, stamped from 1894, and attached to it was a state-issued historic preservation order declaring my mailbox a protected structure under county ordinance. I didn't even look at her face when she opened it. But I could hear the silence crash down. You know that sound when a bully suddenly realizes they're not holding the bigger stick. That's what filled the room. I didn't buy this house to play courtroom chess with a neighborhood committee. When I first moved in, I was just looking for quiet. After 30 years of teaching history at the university, my only ambition was to restore a little craftsman bungalow I'd inherited from my uncle, write a few essays, and maybe spend more time with my books than with traffic. The house sat on a tree-lined street that still had cobblestones under the asphalt if you looked close. And tucked at the end of the driveway was the one detail that sold me completely. An old iron mailbox, hand-forged, sitting on a stone pedestal. My uncle had told me once that it was put there by the original owner, a Civil War veteran, and the design was so unique it had been photographed in a 1930s WPA survey. To me, it was part of the house's soul. A little piece of history that had survived the subdivision boom and the vine-inciting epidemic of the 1980s. I wanted peace, not politics, and certainly not some HOA nonsense. But peace doesn't last long when people smell control. The first letter came 2 weeks after I moved in. It was a friendly notice informing me that my mailbox did not conform to subdivision uniformity standards and would need to be replaced with the approved model, a plastic beige box on a metal stick. At first, I thought it was a mistake. My house had stood since before the subdivision even existed, and the mailbox was practically a landmark. I wrote back politely, explained in its historic significance, even including a photo from the 1930s survey for context. A week later, they taped a violation notice to my door. They called the mailbox non-compliant, external furniture, and warned of escalating fines. That's when I realized this wasn't about a mailbox at all. It was about someone wanting to show they had the power to make me bend. I tried civility. I went to the next board meeting with a folder of documentation. The WPA photograph, county assessor's notes, even my uncle's letters mentioning the restoration. I didn't raise my voice. I simply explained that the mailbox wasn't some whimsical lawn decoration. It was part of the property's recorded history. They didn't care. The president smirked and said, "If you want to live in a museum, maybe you should buy one." Another member laughed. They voted unanimously to fine me $100 a week until it was removed. He sent emails. I cited bylaws showing that homes predating the HOA had grandfathered exemptions. I pointed out that federal law actually limits HOA interference with mailboxes since they under USPS jurisdiction. The responses ranged from curt to mocking, when they responded at all. And then the fines doubled. That's when my patience started to evaporate. You reach a point where you realize talking is just giving them more room to push you. That's when I stopped emailing and started researching. Nights that I used to spend reading novels turned into hours combing through county land records. I requested copies of my deed going back to the original 1894 plat. I pulled zoning maps, state historic registries, postal service ordinances. It was tedious work, but it was also strangely satisfying. Every scrap of paper was like a brick in a wall. I was building a wall they couldn't climb over no matter how loud they shouted. I learned that my house wasn't just old. It was officially listed in the county's Heritage Overlay District, meaning any alteration to historically noted features required state-level approval. The mailbox wasn't just an accessory. It was protected. And better yet, I discovered a preservation order issued in the late 1970s that specifically mentioned the original iron postal receptacle. In other words, not only did the HOA have no authority to remove it, they could actually be fined by the state for attempting to. Meanwhile, the pressure from them escalated. Neighbors I'd barely met stopped waving when I walked the street. A friend in the neighborhood told me the board was gossiping that I was a problem owner, someone who didn't respect the rules. My mailbox became a symbol of defiance, and they were determined to break me over it. That winter, I got the foreclosure threat. They had stacked up so many imaginary fines in their ledger that they claimed I was delinquent enough to seize my property. I remember holding that notice, printed in all caps, like a ransom note, and feeling the anger settle into something colder. They thought they had me cornered. They had no idea I was already holding the one document that would corner them instead. The day of the showdown, I was ready. I showed up at their so-called compliance hearing with my own folder. They started the performance right on cue. The president reading off violations like she was prosecuting a criminal, their lawyer glaring at me like I was wasting his billable hours. When she declared that they were proceeding toward foreclosure, I didn't argue. I just opened the folder and placed 2 papers on the table. My deed, which predated the HOA by nearly a century, and the state preservation order that specifically protected the mailbox they wanted gone. I'll never forget the sound of the room when their lawyer picked it up and realized what he was looking at. The paper crackled in his hands, and suddenly no one was speaking. The president flushed red and sputtered something about community standards, but the lawyer shook his head. He knew. They all knew. They had been trying to bulldoze history with bureaucracy, and they'd just run headfirst into the law. The aftermath was as predictable as it was delicious. Within a month, the foreclosure action was withdrawn. The fines disappeared from my account like they had never existed. At the next board election, 2 members quietly resigned, including the president. They didn't apologize. Of course, people like that never do. But the silence was apology enough. My neighbors, who had once looked at me with suspicion, started asking questions. A few even thanked me for standing up, because they had been harassed over their own gardens, sheds, or flags. Suddenly, the board wasn't feared anymore. It was tolerated at best, ignored at worst. And my mailbox? It still stands. Iron and stone. Same as it has for 131 years. Now, when I check the mail, sometimes I catch a board member driving past. They either nod stiffly or pretend not to see me. I don't care which. The mailbox stays. The house stays. And the lesson stays. If you're going to threaten someone over a piece of history, you'd better check the history books first.